My name is Margot Hayes, and I am 66 years old. The story I am about to tell you unraveled the very fabric of my reality. It begins on the quietest day of my life, my husband Ernest's funeral. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wilted flowers. I stood, a solitary figure in black, as the priest's words washed over me, meaningless and hollow. Then my phone vibrated in my clutch, a jarring intrusion in the silence. A message from an unknown number. I'm alive. 2 words that sent an arctic chill straight to my soul. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. That's not me in the casket, I typed back, my heart hammering against my ribs. Who are you? The response was swift, a digital ghost whispering from the shadows. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. In that single earth-shattering moment, my world didn't just crumble, it splintered. My gaze snapped up, searching the small crowd. There they were, Charles and Henry, my own sons, standing sentinel by their father's casket. Their expressions weren't shattered by grief. They were strangely, unnervingly calm. Their tears looked rehearsed, their comforting hugs to mourners as cold and impersonal as a business handshake. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. For 42 years, Ernest had been my everything, my rock, my sanctuary, the steady beat of my heart. I met him when I was 24, in our sleepy little town of Spring Creek. We were 2 kids from the same dusty back roads, our dreams as modest as our means. I cleaned houses to care for my ailing mother. He repaired bicycles in the small, greasy shop his father left him. We were poor in pockets, but rich in a way money could never touch. We had real, unshakable love. I remember our beginning like it was yesterday. A Tuesday morning, the air already warm. I was walking to the market in my faded green dress and scuffed shoes. He stepped out of his shop, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag, and offered me a smile so shy and genuine it stole my breath. "Good morning, Margot," he said, his voice soft as a summer breeze. "Need me to take a look at your bike?" I didn't own a bike, but I found an excuse just to stand there and talk to him. That one conversation blossomed into stolen moments under the town's ancient oak tree, into whispered promises of forever, and finally, into a simple wedding overflowing with hope. Our first years were a beautiful struggle. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with a tin roof that sang when it rained, a symphony that required a constellation of pots and pans on the floor to keep us dry. But we were happy. Ernest worked from dawn until dusk, and I sewed dresses for the town's women. When Charles was born, I thought my heart would explode with joy. He was a perfect baby with his father's earnest eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Henry arrived, just as beautiful. We poured every ounce of our love into them. Ernest was a wonderful father, teaching them to fish, to fix things with their hands, to be good men. I was their comfort, their constant. We were a close-knit family, or so I desperately believed. As they grew, a subtle shift began. Charles, the eldest, was fiercely ambitious. He'd ask why we didn't have a new car, why our lives were so simple. Henry, his ever-faithful shadow, echoed his every word. The true fracture came when Charles turned 18. Ernest, beaming with pride, offered him a place in the shop. Charles looked at his father's calloused, honest hands with pure contempt. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." I saw the light in Ernest's eyes die that day. He never complained, but I'd find him on the porch at night, staring at the stars with a profound sadness. His son had rejected his entire world. The years rolled on. To my surprise, Charles did become important. He clawed his way into city real estate, and Henry followed. They started making money, real money, the kind Ernest and I could scarcely comprehend. At first I was so proud. My boys had escaped the poverty we never could. But that pride curdled into a deep, quiet sorrow. Their visits became rare, their calls brief and rushed. When they did grace us with their presence, they arrived in gleaming cars and tailored suits, speaking a language of investments and properties I didn't understand. They looked at us, their own parents with a mixture of pity and shame. "Mom," Charles said once, gesturing to our beloved weathered home, "you and Dad should move. This place is falling apart." He wasn't wrong. But this house held our life, every memory, every laugh, every shared dream. It was our sanctuary. Ernest, ever the wise one, would simply squeeze my hand and whisper, "Margot, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore." I fought that truth, making excuses for their empty chairs at the table, their broken promises. "They're busy building their lives," I'd tell myself. But in my heart I knew. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. The final stark transformation came with Charles's marriage to Jasmine Albright, a woman from the city who wore her disdain like expensive perfume. The first time she visited, her designer heels sank into the soft earth of our porch. She offered me a limp, condescending handshake, her eyes performing a slow, critical inventory of our home that made me feel microscopic. At dinner, she pushed the food I'd cooked with so much love around her plate. Charles, a nervous stranger, leaned in and whispered to her, "Next time, we'll take them to a proper restaurant." I heard every word. Each one was a tiny, precise cut to my soul. Henry remained single but adopted his brother's cold distance. His visits were fleeting, his attention always on his phone, closing another deal. "Mom, I have to go. Big meeting tomorrow." Our family Sundays faded into memory. Christmases became cold. Formal affairs filled with expensive, meaningless gifts and hasty exits. Ernest and I grew old together, a party of two, finding solace only in each other. He kept working in his shop, though his hands, once so strong, had begun to falter. And I clung to the memory of the family we once were, never imagining that the ultimate betrayal was still to come, and that it would arrive in a text message from beyond the grave. I continued my sewing, but my vision was clouded by a gathering sorrow. We managed on our modest income, clinging to the quiet pride of never asking our successful sons for a sing. We still had our dignity, even if we had lost our boys. "Do you know the true tragedy, Margot?" Ernest said to me one evening, his voice soft, as we sat on our weathered porch. "It isn't their wealth. It's that the wealth has made them believe we no longer hold any value." His words struck a deep, resonant chord. He was right, as always. Our sons hadn't just upgraded their lives. They had downgraded us. We were no longer beloved parents, but an embarrassing relic, a living monument to a humble past they were desperate to erase. The chasm widened when Charles purchased a sprawling $200,000 home in an exclusive city neighborhood. Henry soon followed, investing in a luxury condo that cost more than we'd earned in a lifetime. Suddenly our sons were men of fortune, and we were the poor relations. During one of her rare, disdainful visits, Jasmine made her move. "You really should sell this place and move into a retirement community," she suggested, her voice slick with false concern. "There are some very nice places for people your age. You'd be more comfortable." The phrase retirement community was a slap in the face. After 40 years of building a home filled with love and memory, they wanted to warehouse us, to discard us. "We don't need a home," Ernest replied, his voice layered with a quiet, unshakable dignity. "We are home right here." But I saw the look that passed between Charles and Henry. They were in full agreement. To them, we were no longer family. We were a logistical problem. Then came the direct assault. Charles arrived one day, armed with documents he'd drawn up without our knowledge. "Dad, Mom," he began, his smile a polished professional facade. "I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth, at most, $1,000. If you sell, I can add some money to get you settled somewhere." Better. The word was an insult. There was no place better than the walls that held our laughter, our struggles, our entire life together. "Besides," he pressed on, "I think Dad should retire. He's 70. It's time to rest." Ernest looked at him, his eyes pools of infinite sadness. "Son, my work isn't a burden. It's my purpose. It's what keeps me alive." "But you could get hurt," Henry interjected, his voice unusually sharp. At your age, an accident would be catastrophic. Their words were wrapped in the language of care. But I sensed something colder beneath the surface, a gnawing impatience, a sinister urgency I couldn't yet name. The pressure intensified over the following months. They brought realtors to our door without warning. They had the property appraised behind our backs. They spoke in a new, unsettling language of what was best for everyone. "Look," Charles said during a painfully tense dinner, "Jasmine and I are planning for children. The expenses will be significant. If you sell the house and downsize, that money could serve as an early inheritance. An early inheritance." The audacious demand stole the air from my lungs. He was asking us to fund his future by erasing our present. Ernest remained calm, but I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten like a coiled spring. "Son," he said, his voice dangerously low, "when your mother and I are gone, all we have will be yours. But while we draw breath, our lives are our own to live." "Don't be stubborn," Henry cut in, a harshness I'd never heard from him before. "You're living in the past. You need to be realistic." That night, after they were gone, Ernest and I sat in the dark, talking until the sky began to lighten. For the first time in 42 years, we voiced the unthinkable. Our sons were strangers. "Something is very wrong, Margot," Ernest whispered, a shadow of deep worry in his eyes. "This isn't just greed. There's a darkness behind this pressure. I can feel it." I had no idea how terrifyingly accurate his premonition was. I couldn't fathom that the people I had carried and nursed and loved were weaving a web of betrayal so profound it would shatter our world forever. Saitik, last normal conversation I had with Charles, was 3 weeks before the earth fell away. He came alone without Jasmine, his demeanor unusually grave. "Mom," he said, sitting at the very kitchen table where he'd once done his homework, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, Henry and I will always take care of you." At the time, his words were a small comfort. But now, standing by Ernest's grave, they echo in my mind with a chilling, prophetic menace. No matter what happens, what did he know? What had they already set in motion? The end of our world came on a Tuesday morning. Ernest had left for the shop at dawn, as he had for over 40 years. I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang with an urgency that froze my blood. "Mrs. Hayes?" a stranger's voice asked. "I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The words blurred into a meaningless roar. The world tilted. My legs gave way, and I clutched the doorframe to keep from collapsing. "What happened? Is he okay? Is he alive? Ma'am, please, just come as soon as you can." The drive was a foggy nightmare. My neighbor, Doris, had to take the wheel because my hands were shaking too violently to hold the keys. My mind raced, refusing to accept it. Ernest was careful. He was methodical. An accident made no sense. When we arrived at the hospital, Charles and Henry were already there. That detail should have screamed at me. No one had called them. At least I hadn't. But in my shattered state, I didn't question it. I just fell into Charles's arms. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with what I mistook for grief. "Dad, he's in really bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines in the shop exploded," Charles explained, his voice a practiced monotone. "Severe burns, traumatic brain injury." Henry stood beside him, his eyes red-rimmed but his posture rigid. He seemed less consumed by sorrow and more vibrating with a nervous, unsettling energy, like a man awaiting a stock ticker, not his father's prognosis. "Can I see him?" I begged, my voice cracking. "Only immediate family. 5 minutes maximum," the nurse replied softly. When I stepped into that sterile ICU room, my knees nearly buckled. Ernest was a ghost of himself, swallowed by a tangle of wires and tubes, his face and arms swathed in white bandages. The rhythmic, artificial hiss of the ventilator filled the silence where his voice should have been. I stumbled to his bedside and cradled his hand, the only familiar part of him left. "Ernest, my love, I'm here," I whispered, my tears falling onto the sheet. "You're going to pull through this. You have to. For a breathtaking second, I felt it, a faint, deliberate squeeze. His eyelids fluttered behind their closed veil. He was in there. My fighter was still battling to come back to me. The next 3 days were a torturous blur. I became a permanent fixture in the waiting room, existing on bad coffee and frayed nerves. Charles and Henry took shifts, but their focus was elsewhere. They hovered around the doctors, their conversations a low, urgent hum. I caught fragments that curdled my blood. Henry was obsessed with medical insurance, the mounting costs. Charles was on the phone, his voice low, discussing life insurance policies and beneficiaries with a chilling familiarity. "Mom," Charles said on the second day, steering me away from Ernest's door. "We reviewed Dad's insurance. There's a $50,000 life insurance policy. The workers' comp could cover another $75,000. The numbers hung in the air, ugly and profane. I don't care about the money," I snapped, my voice raw. "I just want your father to get better." "Of course, Mom," he soothed, but his eyes held no warmth. They were the eyes of an actuary, coldly assessing a bottom line while his father lay dying. On the third day, Dr. Patterson delivered the verdict in a quiet office. "Mrs. Hayes," he began, his compassion a stark contrast to my son's demeanor, "your husband's condition is critical. The infection is spreading. The brain trauma. We have to be realistic. We should prepare for the worst. Prepare for the worst." The euphemism was a dagger. "We want to try everything," I insisted, sobs racking my body. No matter the cost, no matter how long, but Charles and Henry exchanged a glance, a silent, complicit agreement that froze the blood in my veins. "Mom," Charles said, his voice dripping with a false, reasoned calm, "we have to be practical. Dad would never have wanted to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden." The word detonated in the small room. "A burden?" I exploded, a lifetime of love fueling my fury. "He's your father." "We know," Henry cut in, his tone clinical. "But we also have to think of you. The medical bills will be astronomical. They could wipe out everything you have. Again, always the money." They were conducting a cost-benefit analysis on their father's life. That night, in the eerie silence of the ICU, I clung to Ernest's hand. "My love, I don't know what to do," I whispered, my forehead resting on the bed rail. "They're giving up on you, but I'm not. I can't." And then the moment that haunts me. His fingers twitched. A weak but undeniable squeeze. His lips parted, trembling as if trying to form a word, a warning, a name. "He's reacting. He's trying to speak." I cried out, my hope surging, but by the time the nurses arrived, the moment had passed. "Involuntary muscle spasms, I'm afraid," one said gently, patting my shoulder. "It doesn't indicate consciousness, but I knew." I felt his desperate final attempt to bridge the void. He had something to tell me. 2 days later, in the pre-dawn gloom of Friday, a chorus of frantic alarms shattered the hospital quiet. Code blue, lights flashed. A crash cart rattled past me as I jolted awake in the hallway chair. "No, no!" I screamed, scrambling toward his room. For 40 agonizing minutes, a team of doctors fought a losing battle against the inevitable. At 4:37 a.m., they stopped. The world stopped. Ernest was gone. The pain was a physical evisceration. I collapsed, wrapping my arms around his still, warm body, howling my denial into the silence. Charles and Henry arrived an hour later. They were not disheveled with grief. They were prepared. They carried folders, documents, and a list of funeral homes. "We've already spoken with Spring Creek Funeral Home," Charles stated, his voice devoid of tremor as I wept uncontrollably. "They can collect the body this morning." Henry nodded, already moving to the next item on his morbid checklist. "The insurance claim process is already underway." Their efficiency was monstrous. Their organization an hour after their father's death was not comforting. It was a confession. Something was deeply, horribly wrong, but my grief was a tidal wave, drowning all coherent thought. The funeral was scheduled for Monday. Charles managed every detail without my input, selecting the plainest casket, the most abbreviated service, as if rushing to tidy up an inconvenient mess. "It's what Dad would have wanted," he said, when I weakly protested my exclusion. Something simple, no fuss. The stage was set, the players in position, and I, drowning in a sorrow they seemed not to share, was the only one who didn't know the script. But Ernest deserved more than this indecent rush to enter him and move on. He deserved a celebration of his life, not this hushed, hurried affair. The day of the funeral was bleak and overcast, the sky a sheet of unbroken gray, as if nature itself was mourning the man my sons were so eager to bury. I wore my only black dress, the same one from my mother's funeral a lifetime ago. My hands trembled so violently that my dear neighbor Doris had to fasten the small, stubborn buttons for me. "Be strong, Margot," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she smoothed my hair. "Ernest would want you to be strong, but I felt no strength. I was a hollow vessel, emptied of everything but a grief so profound it had its own weight. 42 years of shared life cannot be sealed shut in a box so easily. His presence haunted our home, his favorite chipped coffee mug, his worn tools on the porch, the indentation on his pillow that still held the faint, comforting scent of him. At the cemetery, the scene was starkly, unnervingly sparse. For a man who had lived 7 decades in the same town, who had fixed the bicycles of generations and greeted every neighbor by name, the turnout was a cruel insult. Only Charles, Henry, Jasmine, Doris, the pastor, and I stood at the graveside. "Where is everyone?" I whispered to Charles, my voice cracking. "Where are the men from the shop?" "The neighbors. We didn't want to make a spectacle," he replied, his answer too quick, too rehearsed. Dad was a private man. He would have wanted something intimate. The lie was as transparent as glass. Ernest was the heart of our community. He would have wanted a crowd, stories, laughter through tears. This secrecy, this isolation, was Charles's design. During the service, I watched my sons through a new, dispassionate lens. Charles wore a mask of solemnity, but his eyes kept flicking to his watch. Henry shifted his weight, radiating a restless energy, as if mentally reviewing a to-do list. Jasmine, behind her black veil, was discreetly checking her phone. This was their final farewell, a performance of impatience and distraction. The pastor spoke of eternal rest and God's embrace, but the words felt like dust in my mouth. I didn't want Ernest to rest. I wanted him back on our porch, sipping coffee and holding my hand. When the time came to cast the first handful of earth onto the casket, my legs gave way. Doris held me up as I wept. The sound of dirt hitting wood, a brutal final punctuation to my life as I knew it. And it was in that exact moment, standing at the precipice of my despair, that my phone vibrated. A text. From an unknown number. "I'm alive." "That's not me in the casket," the world tilted. The letters swam before my eyes. Was this a cruel phantom of my grief-stricken mind? My hands shaking uncontrollably, I typed a reply. "Who are you?" The response was immediate. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone slipped from my grasp as if it were a live coal. Doris moved to retrieve it, but I snatched it back, my heart hammering against my ribs. No one could see this. Not until I understood. "Are you all right, Mom?" Charles asked, approaching with a face etched in manufactured concern. I stared at him, searching for a crack in his facade. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice strangely steady. "I just need to go home." The ride back was a silent nightmare, the mysterious message echoing in my mind. A sick joke? Or a terrifying possibility? If Ernest was alive, who was in that coffin? And if he wasn't, who knew the intimate details of our lives and our son's betrayal to send such a warning? That night, shrouded in the oppressive silence of my empty house, I began to piece together the insanity. Ernest's accident had never made sense. He knew his shop like the back of his hand. A catastrophic explosion was his worst nightmare, not a likely reality, and my son's presence at the hospital. How had they arrived so swiftly? The call had come to me, then the money. From the very first hour, their focus had been on policies and payouts, as if they were reading from a prepared script, driven by a new, fierce instinct. I went to Ernest's old wooden desk and found his metal lockbox. Inside, nestled among our important documents, was the life insurance policy. Charles had mentioned $50,000, but what he hadn't mentioned was the amendment. The coverage had been increased from a modest $5,000 to that staggering sum just 6 months ago. Why, Ernest? Why wouldn't you tell me? And then I found it, another policy I knew nothing about. A workers' compensation policy, taken out a mere 2 months before his death. $75,000 for accidental death on the job, a fortune. A motive. My phone vibrated again, the same unknown number. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. This was no prank. This was a guide. The next morning I went to the bank. Mrs. Thompson, the manager who had known us for 30 years, greeted me with tearful eyes. "Margot, I'm so sorry. Ernest was a good man." "Thank you," I said, my voice tight. "I need to see our account statements. I need to understand our situation." She brought up the records for the past 6 months. What I saw turned my blood to ice. There, in black and white, were a series of large, unauthorized withdrawals. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, and $4,000 in March. A total of $8,000 vanished from our life savings. I looked up at Mrs. Thompson, my voice a trembling whisper. "Who authorized these withdrawals?" "Your husband came in person," Mrs. Thompson explained, her brow furrowed. "He said he needed the money for major repairs at the shop, but I kept the household accounts. I knew every dollar that came in and out. Ernest had never mentioned repairs of that scale. The very idea was a lie. Do you have the signatures?" I asked, my voice tight. She produced the receipts. The signature looked like Ernest's, but to my eye, trained by decades of seeing it on birthday cards and love notes, it was wrong. The lines were hesitant, the flourish at the end of the E too forced. It was a forgery. "Mrs. Thompson," I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Did he come alone?" She thought for a moment, then her eyes widened slightly. "Now that you mention it, Charles was with him once or twice. He said he was helping his father with the paperwork, that Ernest's eyes weren't what they used to be." The lie deepened, becoming more vile. Ernest's eyes were sharp. He only needed his glasses for the finest print. Charles hadn't been a helper. He had been a puppeteer. That afternoon, as I stared at the damning receipts, another message arrived. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernest he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. The pieces of the horrifying puzzle were locking into place. The inflated insurance policies, the stolen savings, Charles's cold clinical efficiency. It was no longer a suspicion. It was a conspiracy, but the terrifying questions remained. Had they planned his death? And who was this ghost guiding me from the shadows? The following days were a waking nightmare. Every smile from my sons felt like a razor blade, every hug a restraint. I was playing a part in a play whose tragic ending I was only just beginning to understand. Then another message cut through the fog. "Go to Ernest's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see." I went to the shop for the first time since the accident. The air was still and thick with dust. But what I found was not the scene of a violent explosion. The place was orderly, too orderly. There were no blackened walls, no shrapnel, no gaping hole where a machine should have been. Every tool, every piece of equipment, the welder, the compressor, the saw, was in its place, intact and functional. My blood ran cold. Where was the explosion? I went to Ernest's desk, my hands trembling as I pulled open the drawers. And there, I found the truth he had tried to leave for me. A note in his familiar, steady hand, dated 3 days before his death. "Charles insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Margot, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions." Beneath it another, "Henry brought me papers to sign for shop modernization. Why the rush? The terms are confusing. I feel pressured. My husband had known. He had sensed the viper in his own nest." Then my fingers brushed against a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in Ernest's script. With a heart threatening to beat out of my chest, I tore it open. "My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed a darkness in Charles and Henry. Their interest in our finances, the insurance, the house, it feels predatory. Jasmine pressures them constantly. Yesterday, Charles told me I should be more concerned for my safety, that at my age, any accident could be fatal. Margot, those words did not sound like concern. They sounded like a threat. I love you. If I am gone, do not trust anyone blindly. Not even our sons. Forever yours, Ernest, the letter fluttered from my numb fingers. He had seen his death coming. He had tried to warn me from beyond the grave. That night Charles visited, armed with a bottle of wine and a smile that no longer fooled me. Mom, I've been thinking about your future, he began, pouring a glass without offering me one. The insurance money is being processed. It will be $125,000. How do you know the exact amount? I asked, feigning innocent curiosity. I helped Dad with the paperwork, he said smoothly. He wanted to ensure you were taken care of. Another lie, straight from the devil's mouth. And what should I do with this money? I asked, watching him like a hawk, his eyes lit up with an avaricious gleam. You could buy a smaller place. Or even better, a nice retirement community. Henry and I could manage the funds for you, invest them, make them grow. At your age, it's easy to be taken advantage of. Manage my money, the final piece of their plan. They wouldn't just kill their father for the insurance. They would imprison their mother and seize the payout. Let me think about it, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Of course, Jasmine chimed in, her sweetness a toxic syrup. But don't take too long. It's for your own good. After they left, I sat in the deepening dark, shaking with a potent cocktail of rage and terror. My sons were not just greedy. They were monsters. My phone vibrated, pulling me from the abyss. It was a longer message from the unknown number. They didn't use a machine. It was the car. The brakes. They made it look like an accident. The shop was a cover. Meet me tomorrow. 10 a.m. Oak Creek Diner. Come alone. Tell no one. The next message was a direct command. Tomorrow, go to the police. Ask for the accident report. You'll find contradictions. The following morning, I walked into the local police station, my heart a frantic drum. Sergeant O'Connell, a man who'd shared coffee with Ernest for 20 years, greeted me with gentle eyes. The report on my husband's accident. Please, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He frowned, his brow furrowing. Accident, Mrs. Hayes? What accident? The explosion at his shop. The work accident. He spent several minutes checking the files, his confusion deepening. Margot, he said finally, his voice low and serious. There is no report of an explosion. In fact, we have no record of any work-related incident involving Ernest. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. But, my son said, Mrs. Hayes, he continued, pulling another file. Your husband was brought to the hospital, but not from his shop. The medical report lists the cause of admission as acute poisoning. They found a significant quantity of methanol in his system, enough to cause blindness, organ failure, and death. Poisoning. The word echoed in the silent, sterile room. It wasn't an accident. It was an assassination. Why wasn't I told? I whispered, my world tilting on its axis. The next of kin who signed the admission papers requested full confidentiality, the sergeant explained, his face grim. They claimed you were too emotionally fragile to handle the technical details. The next of kin, Charles and Henry. They had not only poisoned their father, they had crafted the entire narrative, smothering the truth under a blanket of lies and false concern. Mrs. Hayes, Sergeant O'Connell said, leaning forward, if you have reason to believe the circumstances of Ernest's death are suspicious, we can open a formal investigation. I had more than reason. I had certainty. That afternoon, Henry arrived with a bouquet of flowers, their vibrant colors a mockery of my grief. You look tired, Mom. I'm fine, I lied, watching him, truly seeing him for the first time. Just thinking about the future. Good. Charles and I were talking. You should sell the house soon. Strike while the iron is hot on the market. The rush, Henry? Why now? Old houses depreciate. You need liquidity. Funeral costs, medical bills, more lies. The funeral had been a bargain bin affair. The insurance had covered the hospital. Henry, I said, my gaze locking with his. You knew your father didn't die in a shop accident. For a split second, raw panic flashed in his eyes before the mask slammed back down. What are you talking about, Mom? I went to the police. There is no report, no explosion. This time the panic was harder to contain. You shouldn't be doing things like that. They'll just confuse you. The grief, it's affecting your mind. The grief is affecting me, or you've been lying to me. He stood up so abruptly his chair screeched. You need to rest. We'll talk when you're calmer. He fled, but not before making a frantic, hushed call from my porch. That night, my ghostly ally sent its most chilling warning yet. They're coming together tomorrow. They will try to convince you that you're insane, that grief is making you imagine things. Do not believe them. Do not eat or drink anything they offer you. The prophecy was fulfilled to the letter. The next day, Charles, Henry, and Jasmine descended upon my home like a committee of concerned vultures, armed with saccharine smiles and a bag of pastries. We're worried, Charles began, his voice dripping with false syrup. The neighbors say you've been acting strangely. Doris mentioned you've been talking to yourself. A blatant lie. Doris was my ally. Jasmine brought your favorite pastries, Henry added, gesturing to the bag, and we made that special coffee you love. The warning echoed in my mind. Do not eat or drink anything. Were they planning to finish what they started? To silence me the same way they had Ernest? Thank you, but I've already eaten, I said, my voice cool and distant. But Mom, Jasmine pressed, her smile a sharp, painted thing. You need to keep your strength up. You've lost so much weight since the tragedy. I said I'm fine. Charles and Henry exchanged a loaded glance, the same one they'd shared in the hospital when discussing quality of life. Mom, Charles said, moving closer, invading my space. We need to talk. We've consulted some specialists about your behavior. My behavior? Yes, the strange questions, the police station, this obsession with details about Dad. It's a common reaction to loss, but it can become dangerous if left untreated. Henry nodded, his face a mask of grave concern. We spoke to Dr. Albright. He says it's typical for women your age to develop paranoia after losing a spouse. Paranoia. They were gaslighting me. They were trying to brand me as a crazy old woman to discredit everything I had discovered. I am not paranoid, I stated, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. I am asking questions that should have been asked from the beginning. What questions? Charles challenged, a flicker of anger in his eyes. Questions like why there's no police report for the accident. Questions like why the shop is spotless, with no sign of an explosion. Questions like why you withdrew $8,000 from our savings using a forged signature. The room fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. The masks slipped completely, revealing the sheer, undiluted panic beneath. Henry was the first to break, his voice a desperate, flailing thing. Mom, those things have simple explanations. Dad took that money for secret repairs. A surprise for you. What surprise? I countered, my voice like steel. He was going to remodel the house, Charles lied, the words tumbling out too quickly. He'd hired workers to fix the roof, paint the walls. A birthday surprise for you. The lie was so flimsy it was an insult. Where were the workers? The materials? Why was there not a single soul in Spring Creek who had heard of this grand project? And the police report? Charles pressed on, desperation creeping into his tone. Not every accident requires a report, Mom, especially on private property. Another lie. Sergeant O'Connell had been unequivocal. Any serious injury demanded an official record. Mom? Jasmine interjected, her voice a syrupy poison. We only want what's best for you. We think you should move somewhere with specialized medical attention. A care facility, Charles clarified, his eyes cold. For individuals experiencing complicated grief, they have psychologists, nurses, activities. And in the meantime, Henry finished, laying their final card on the table. We can handle selling the house, managing the insurance, all the complicated things you shouldn't have to worry about in your Current state, there it was. The master plan laid bare. Declare me insane, lock me away and loot my life. First, they murdered their father for the insurance. Now, they would imprison their mother to seize the rest. And if I refuse? I asked, my gaze steady. Charles's smile was a ghastly thing. Why would you refuse? We only want what's best for you. Because this is my house. This is where I built my life with Ernest. This is where I raised you. Mom, Henry sighed, the performance of a weary, put-upon son. You can't live in the past. Dad is gone. You have to accept it. I have accepted he's gone. What I won't accept is you stealing my life and my money. The masks shattered. Charles stood abruptly, his patience gone. Fine. If you won't listen to reason, we'll take more drastic measures. What does that mean? It means we will initiate legal proceedings to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have witnesses to your erratic behavior. We have a doctor's report confirming senile paranoia. A doctor? What doctor? Dr. Albright has already signed a preliminary evaluation, Henry stated coldly. Based on our testimony, he believes you require specialized care. A doctor who had never laid eyes on me. How much had that fraudulent report cost them? So, Charles concluded, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, you can cooperate voluntarily, or we can do this through the courts. But either way, you are going to get the help you need. It was a direct, brutal threat. I need time to think, I said, buying the only currency I had left. Time. Of course, Jasmine purred. But don't take too long. For your own good. The moment the door closed behind them, my legs gave way. I trembled not with fear, but with a volcanic rage. My own sons were not just greedy, they were sociopaths. That night, my phone delivered salvation. Margot, this is Stephen Callahan, a private investigator. Ernest hired me 3 weeks before he died, suspicious of Charles and Henry. They poisoned him with methanol in his coffee. I have audio evidence of them planning it. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., the corner cafe. Sit at the back. I'll be there. The ghost had a name, and he had proof. A fierce, cold calm settled over me. The war had begun. They had money, influence, and a terrifying ruthlessness. But I had the truth, and a murdered husband's love had armed me with both a weapon and an army of one. For the first time since Ernest's death, I smiled. They had underestimated their mother. They were about to learn that a woman fighting for her husband's memory is a force of nature no amount of greed can withstand. The next day, I dressed with purpose, choosing a serious purple dress, my armor for battle. At 2:30, I walked to the cafe, my senses heightened, seeing a potential enemy in every passerby. I took the back table, ordered tea, and waited, my hands steady on the worn wood. At exactly 3 p.m., a man approached. He was in his 50s, with intelligent eyes and a kind, serious face. He carried a simple brown folder. Mrs. Hayes? He asked, his voice low. I nodded. I'm Stephen Callahan. I'm so sorry for your loss. Ernest was a good man. He sat, placing the folder between us like a sacred text. Before we begin, you need to know what you're about to hear will be very painful. Are you ready? I've been ready since your first message, I replied, my voice unwavering. Stephen opened the folder and retrieved a small digital recorder. Ernest came to me a month ago, he began. He was terrified of his own sons. He pressed play. He hired me to investigate them discreetly, Stephen said, his finger hovering over the play button. He was a good man, Mrs. Hayes, a scared man. He pressed play. My husband's voice, a sound I thought I'd never hear again, filled the space between us, warm and familiar, yet laced with a fear that broke my heart anew. Stephen, I need you to know, if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Charles and Henry, they're pressuring me about the life insurance. Charles brought me papers yesterday, said it was to protect Margot. But when I read them, there were clauses that benefited them. Something is very wrong. Hearing him was a blessing and a curse. It was Ernest, alive in that recording, confirming the nightmare I was living. The recording continued. Henry's been asking strange questions. My routine, what I eat for breakfast, if Margot comes to the shop. He says it's concern, but it feels like reconnaissance. Stephen paused the recorder. This was 3 weeks before. But there's more. His expression was grim. This is more recent. He played another file. This time, it was Charles's voice, cold and businesslike on a phone call. No, we can't wait. The old man is getting suspicious. Asked about the insurance yesterday. Yes, I have the methanol. It's perfect. Symptoms mimic a stroke. Mom won't be a problem. After Dad's gone, she'll be so broken we can do whatever we want. Tears I didn't know I had left streamed down my face. It was my firstborn, my Charlie, discussing his father's murder like a corporate merger. There's more, Stephen whispered, his voice heavy. This is from the day before. A new recording began. Henry's voice, it's ready. Tomorrow Charles puts the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it's a new vitamin. The old fool will drink it without a second thought. Symptoms, dizziness, blindness, convulsions, coma. Doctors will call it a stroke. By the time they test for poison, it'll be too late. My world didn't just collapse. It was incinerated. This was not a plan born of passion, but of chilling clinical premeditation. They had executed their father with the precision of a hitman. How? I sobbed, the word a ragged tear. How did my babies become this? Ernest had me place listening devices in your home, Stephen explained gently. He was terrified. He just didn't know of what. He laid photographs on the table. Charles buying methanol at a hardware store 30 miles away. Paid cash, used a fake name. But I have him on video. The image was clear. My son leaving a store with a small, deadly bottle, 5 days before the murder. And this, Stephen said, spreading financial documents. Their records. Charles is $70,000 in debt to a city loan shark. Henry has a $40,000 gambling problem. They weren't just greedy, Mrs. Hayes. They were drowning, and they saw your husband as a life raft. The final ugly piece of the puzzle snapped into place. Desperation had forged their monstrousness. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked, my voice shaking. Because they were smart. They bribed the attending physician. The death certificate doesn't say poisoning. It says heart failure due to a work accident. Without that medical evidence, my audio might not have been enough. But now we have a case. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a painful resolve. And there's one more thing you need to hear, Mrs. Hayes. The most important thing. My blood turned to ice. What? He played the final recording. Charles and Henry together. Once we have Dad's insurance, we need to deal with Mom, Charles stated, his voice flat. How? Henry asked, the same way. But we'll make it look like a suicide. A grieving widow who couldn't go on. No one will question it. We're her only heirs. The house, the savings, the insurance. Nearly $200,000. It all becomes ours. The recording stopped. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. They hadn't just killed their father. They had a blueprint for my murder. I began to shake. A violent tremor of pure, undiluted horror. Mrs. Hayes, Stephen said, his voice a steady anchor in my storm. I know this is devastating. But we have enough now. We can make them pay. What do we do? I asked, wiping my tears with a hand that was suddenly steady. The grief was now secondary to a surging, righteous fury. First, we go to Sergeant O'Connell. He's clean. Second, we move fast. Your sons are meeting with Judge Miller tomorrow at 10 a.m. to start the process to have you declared incompetent. If they succeed, this gets much harder. I stood up, a new woman forged in the fires of betrayal. Then we act tonight. Exactly, Stephen confirmed. But first, the final piece. He slid a last photograph across the table. It showed Ernest leaving a medical clinic in the city. 3 days before he died. He went for a full physical. The results show he was in perfect health. No heart conditions. Perfect blood pressure. This proves his death was not from natural causes. It was the keystone, the final, irrefutable truth. I looked at Stephen, this stranger who had become my only ally, and took his hand in mine. My voice was low, clear, and filled with a lifetime of strength. Stephen, I said, let's go bury my sons. Thank you for keeping your promise to my husband, I said, my voice steady as I looked at Stephen. Now let's get justice. That very night we went to the police station. Sergeant O'Connell was on duty, and the quiet precinct was the perfect stage for our reckoning. Sergeant, I began, my tone leaving no room for doubt. I am here to file a formal complaint for the murder of my husband, Ernest Hayes. Murder, he repeated, stunned. The certificate lists heart complications. The certificate is a lie, I stated, placing Stephen's folder on his desk with a definitive thud. My husband was deliberately poisoned by our sons. For 2 hours we laid out the case. The chilling audio confessions, the photo of Charles buying the methanol, the forged bank signatures, Ernest's clean bill of health, and finally, the recording detailing their plan to murder me. Sergeant O'Connell listened, his face growing graver with each piece of evidence. "This is monstrous," he finally murmured. "Mrs. Hayes, are you certain? Once we arrest them, there's no going back." "Sergeant," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "Those men are not my sons. They are cold-blooded killers who murdered their father for money and plan to do the same to me. There is no turning back for them." He immediately called the district attorney. The DA arrived, and after reviewing the evidence, authorized arrest warrants for Charles and Henry on the spot. "We'll move at dawn," the DA said. "We need to secure all evidence before they can destroy it." Stephen walked me home. "Will you be all right alone?" "I will," I said, a newfound strength solidifying within me. "After what I've heard, I am no longer afraid. I have the truth on my side. I didn't sleep that night." I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by photographs of Ernest. For the first time, the pain was joined by a profound sense of resolution. Justice was coming. At 6 a.m. my phone rang. It was Charles. "Mom, you need to come to Henry's. Something terrible has happened." "What happened?" I asked, feigning concern. "Better I explain in person." "Please, hurry. It was a trap. I knew it." After the recordings, I knew their timetable had moved up. But I also knew the police were already in motion. "I'm on my way," I lied. I stayed put. At 7:30, I watched from my window as a fleet of police cars sped toward my sons' homes. My phone rang incessantly. Charles, then Henry, their voices shifting from urgency to sheer desperation. I did not answer. At 9 a.m., Sergeant O'Connell knocked on my door. "Mrs. Hayes, they're in custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." My legs trembled, but this time it was with the sweet relief of vindication. How did they react? Charles denied everything until we played the recordings. Then he collapsed. Henry tried to flee out a back window. We chased him for 6 blocks. That afternoon, Jasmine came to my door, sobbing, a shattered version of her former self. "Mrs. Hayes, please." "Drop the charges." "Charles isn't bad. He was just desperate." "It's my fault," I pressured him. I looked at her, my heart a fortress of ice. "Jasmine, your husband poisoned my husband. He planned to kill me. There is no justification. But we're family," she shrieked. "The family ended the moment you decided Ernest's life had a price tag," I replied coldly. "Now, get off my property." 3 days later, Ernest's body was exhumed. The lab results confirmed everything. Lethal levels of methanol. The town was rocked by the scandal, the newspapers dubbing it the cruelest crime in a generation. The investigation uncovered the full, sordid picture. Charles's $70,000 debt to violent loan sharks. Henry's $40,000 gambling losses. They had seen their father's life insurance as their only escape, but their own greed, dramatically increasing the policies, had been their undoing, alerting Ernest to their plot. The corrupt doctor who falsified the death certificate was also arrested. Stephen explained how Ernest, guided by a gut-deep fear, had hired him, creating a trail of evidence from beyond the grave. The trial was swift. Faced with the mountain of evidence, both sons eventually pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I stood in the courtroom as the judge delivered the sentence. I did not look at my sons. I looked at a photograph of Ernest that I held in my hand. It was over. I used the insurance money to establish a scholarship in Ernest's name for trade school students, a legacy for the honest work he loved. I still live in our home, surrounded by the good memories, the ghosts of the bad ones finally laid to rest. The mysterious texter, my guardian angel, was Stephen Callahan. He became a dear friend, a living reminder that even in our darkest hour, there are still people who honor their promises. My name is Margot Hayes. I am 67 years old. I lost my husband and my sons in one fell swoop. But I found the truth. And in the end, the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can truly set you free. Your husband was smarter than his sons believed, Stephen explained. He sensed the storm coming, even if he couldn't see its shape. He hired me not just to investigate, but to be your shield if he fell. Did he know they would kill him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Not for certain, but he feared for his life. That's why we documented everything. He was determined that if they struck, the truth would not be buried with him. Even in his final days, Ernest was my protector. His love had built a fortress of evidence that would outlast his killer's lies. The trial began 2 months later. The charges were first-degree murder, carrying a sentence of 25 years to life. The courtroom was a pressure cooker of tension, packed with reporters, neighbors, and the simply horrified, all there for what the papers had dubbed the case of the killer's sons. I wore my best black dress, the same one from my wedding decades ago. Now it was armor. Stephen sat beside me, a steadying presence. Charles and Henry were led in, shackled and clad in prison orange. The sight was a fresh wound to a mother's heart, but the pity was gone, replaced by a vast, desolate sadness for the men they had chosen to become. The prosecutor was methodical and devastating. One by one, he presented the evidence. The recordings echoed in the hushed court, my sons' voices coldly detailing their father's murder. When the tape played of them planning my death, "We need to get rid of Mom too." A collective gasp ripped through the room. An elderly woman fled, sobbing. The cruelty was too much to bear. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor stated, "this is not mere greed. This is a premeditated execution of a loving father, motivated by nothing more than debt and avarice." Their defense lawyers flailed, speaking of desperation and pressure, but they were drowned out by the unassailable mountain of proof. The recordings, the bank forgeries, the forensic report, they formed a chorus of condemnation. When I took the stand, my legs trembled, but my voice was clear. "Mrs. Hayes," the prosecutor began, "what was your relationship with your sons before the murder?" "I thought we had a good relationship," I said, looking directly at the two strangers in orange. "I raised them with all the love I had. Their father worked his hands raw to provide for them. I never imagined that our love would become the reason for his death." "Did you ever suspect they could harm him?" "No, that is the most profound betrayal. I trusted them completely. When they told me about the accident, I believed them. When they rushed the funeral, I mistook their cold efficiency for grief. I never dreamed they were covering up a murder." Charles hung his head. Henry met my gaze with a defiant glare, but I saw the sheen of tears in his eyes. It was too late for remorse. The die was cast. The most harrowing moment came when the prosecutor played the full, unedited recording of them plotting my murder. Charles's voice, flat and ruthless, filled the room. "Once we have Dad's insurance, we need to get rid of Mom too." The air left the courtroom. Dozens of eyes turned to me, filled with a mixture of horror and profound pity. "How did you feel?" the prosecutor asked softly. Hearing that for the first time, I realized, I replied, my voice cracking but unwavering, that I had lost my sons long before I lost my husband. The boys I raised were gone, replaced by monsters who saw their parents as inventory to be liquidated. The defense's cross-examination was a weak attempt to paint me as a grief-crazed old woman, but the recordings were a witness that could not be impeached. Stephen testified next, a pillar of integrity, detailing Ernest's fear and the meticulous investigation that followed. The medical examiner presented the exhumation results, clinically confirming the methanol that had stolen Ernest's life. After 3 days of damning testimony, the closing arguments began. The prosecutor was magnificent. "Charles and Henry Hayes are not victims," he thundered. "They are predators. They saw their own father as an obstacle and their mother as a loose end. They plotted, they poisoned, and they planned to profit from their bloodline. They believed they were smart enough to get away with murder. But Ernest Hayes was smarter, and a mother's love for her husband is more powerful than any son's greed." The jury was out for less than 4 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were stern. "Guilty," the foreman stated, not once but twice. First for Charles, then for Henry, guilty of murder in the first degree. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the gavel fell, a profound silence settled over the room, followed by a slow release of held breath. It was over. I did not look at my sons as they were led away. I looked instead at Stephen, and then at the photograph of Ernest I kept in my purse. There was no victory in this, only a terrible, necessary justice. The long, painful war was finally over. The truth, no matter how ugly, had indeed set me free. Now I could begin to truly mourn the man I loved, and the sons I had lost long before the poison ever touched his lips. "They don't deserve compassion," I had said. "They deserve justice," the jury agreed. After 6 hours, they returned with a verdict that echoed through the silent, tense courtroom: guilty. On both counts, the murder of their father and the conspiracy to murder me. Charles collapsed, the finality of his fate crushing him. Henry remained a statue, his defiance a final hollow fortress. The judge's sentence was a life term without parole. As the gavel fell, a colossal weight, the weight of betrayal, of fear, of unspeakable grief, lifted from my shoulders. This was not celebration. This was absolution. In the weeks that followed, my home transformed. It was no longer a tomb of secrets, but a sanctuary again. The walls held our happy memories, and the shadows of deceit had been banished by the light of truth. Stephen visited often. "How are you, Margot?" he would ask. "At peace," I'd answer, and for the first time it was true. "I sleep through the night now. Ernest can finally rest. I donated every cent of the blood-stained insurance money to start a foundation for victims of family crimes. My own modest savings were enough. I could not build my future on my husband's grave." 6 months later, a letter arrived on prison stationery. It was from Charles. "Mom, I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know I regret everything. The debt, the desperation, it made us monsters. We destroyed the most loving family for money we never even touched. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I can't live with what I've done. Tell Dad we're sorry we were such terrible sons." He was found in his cell the next morning. Upon hearing the news, Henry's mind shattered completely, and he was transferred to a prison psychiatric ward. The sons I had raised were gone in every way a person can be gone. Today, 5 years later, I am 71. My hair is white as snow, a map of the storms I have weathered. But my eyes, my friends tell me, hold a peace they never did before. Ernest's old shop is now a vibrant garden, bursting with his favorite flowers: red roses, cheerful sunflowers, soft white carnations. It is a living memorial, a place of growth instead of death. Stephen became my chosen family. On Wednesday afternoons, we share coffee on the porch. He sometimes asks if I ever regret exposing my sons. "Never," I tell him, my voice firm. The truth is a painful surgery, but a lie is a terminal cancer. It kills the soul. The Ernest Hayes Foundation has become my life's work. It is my answer to the darkness. We provide investigators, lawyers, and therapists so others don't have to fight this battle alone. 6 months ago, a woman named Eleanor came to me. Her story was a haunting echo of my own: a suspicious death, greedy relatives, the cold calculation of inheritance. The foundation stood with her, and her brother was later convicted. She hugged me, her tears soaking my shoulder. "Pexte, Mrs. Hayes," she whispered, "your courage gave me mine. In moments like that I understand the purpose of my pain. My suffering was not in vain. It became a shield for others." Henry remains in the psychiatric facility, a ghost of the boy he once was. I do not visit. The children I loved died long ago, casualties of their own greed. I have learned that family is not a title bestowed by blood, but a bond forged in love, loyalty, and respect. Ernest was my true family. My friends are my family. Stephen is my family. Justice did not bring my husband back, but it gave me back my life. And on quiet evenings, sitting on our porch, I feel his presence beside me, not as a ghost of sorrow, but as a proud, enduring love. He is with me in the garden he inspired, in the foundation that bears his name, and in the peace I finally earned by having the strength to honor the truth, no matter the cost. The doctors say Henry lives in a waking nightmare, trapped in a prison of his own making. He is consumed by a guilt so profound, he believes Ernest visits his cell each night, a spectral judge delivering a perpetual sentence. He has tried to join his brother in death 3 times, but the state keeps him alive in his private hell. I receive his letters occasionally. They are rambling, desperate scribbles full of pleas and phantom apologies. I used to read them, searching for a glimmer of the boy I once held. But I realized I was only sifting through ashes, hoping to find a fire that had long since burned out. Now they remain in a shoebox, unopened. I may read them one day. I may not. I have earned the right to protect my own peace. Jasmine vanished from Spring Creek after the trial, a ghost fleeing the hauntings of her own making. I do not know if she was a co-conspirator or just another soul poisoned by the allure of easy money. The answer no longer matters. Some questions belong to the past, and I have chosen to live in the present. In this town, my story has become a cautionary tale, a local legend whispered about greed and the monsters it can create. Some see me as a hero, others a heartless mother. Their opinions are like weather, they pass. I carry the truth within me, and it is my anchor. My health, the doctor tells me, is remarkably robust for my age. The body heals, he said, when the heart finally finds rest. My Sundays are sacred. I gather flowers from the garden that was once Ernest's shop, and walk to the cemetery. His headstone now bears the inscription I chose after the trial. Ernest Hayes, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than his death. I sit and tell him everything, about the foundation that bears his name, about the families we've helped, about the letters that begin. Because of your courage, I found mine, and I swear I feel his approval in the gentle breeze that rustles the oak leaves above. Do you know what's strangest, my love? I whispered on my last visit. I don't feel anger anymore when I think of our sons. Only a deep, abiding pity. They were given every ounce of love we had, and they chose hatred. They were offered honor, and they chose to be murderers. What a tragic, wasted exchange. Last week, a reporter asked me what I would say to others in my situation. My answer was simple. Family is not a license to harm. Love is not blind. It should have the clearest vision of all. If someone who claims to love you is capable of hurting you for profit, that is not love. And it is never too late to seek justice, no matter who sits in the defendant's chair. This year, on the 5th anniversary of his death, we held a ceremony. Over 200 people came, a sea of faces touched by the legacy born from our tragedy. Stephen gave a speech that brought tears to my eyes. Ernest Hayes was killed by greed, he said, his voice strong and clear. But his story did not end there. His wife's courage ensured that his death would become a shield for others. Evil tried to write the final chapter, but good has turned the page into a story of hope. At night, I sometimes allow myself to look at the old photographs, the little boys with grass-stained knees, beaming beside their father on Christmas morning. I cry for them, for the innocent, boundless potential that was lost. But I do not cry for the men they became. They authored that story themselves. My personal tragedy has become something larger, a testament that justice can find a voice in the most unexpected places. A 66-year-old widow proved that truth is an unstoppable force, that love outlasts betrayal, and that it is never too late to stand for what is right. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Stephen will come for coffee. I'll bake his favorite pastry, and we'll plan the new flowers for the spring. Life is simpler now, quieter, but it is real. It is built on the unshakable foundation of truth. I have learned that family is not a title written in blood, but a bond written in loyalty, respect, and a love that would never, ever cause harm. Ernest, my love, wherever you are, I hope you can see. I kept my promise. I found the truth. I fought for justice, and I have woven our pain into a tapestry of hope for others. Your death was not in vain. You can rest now, and so at last can I